great guys.
Right.
Like his grandfather, his grandmother, Mary Beth, married Michael.
Right.
So how lucky can you be? So you know you have something like that. And then of course you have your three phenomenal aunts on the other side of the family. You know, Kathy, Margaret Ann, and Maureen.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's the way I thought it would start.
I think that makes sense. I'm just gonna go the rest for myself.
Sure,
and then...
go ahead. Oh my gosh, yeah, go ahead. How's that?
So, just for the record, this is
Today's date.
today's April 14th, 2011.
April 14, 2011.
This is John Thomas Nolan. Jack to his friends, which is everybody.
I would like to think that.
And so just, we can start however you want to start. You have a...
Okay. Well, I'd like to start with that little thing.
Yeah, definitely.
For John Christopher Picorni, from your great-grandfather. Katie and Michael, I have to read this because I just finished it. Katie and Michael are excited, I'd say, expecting your arrival and counting the days. And great-grandfather admits he's just the same to think that that newest angel will share his name. So John Christopher, Jack it will be, and will be joyfully welcomed into our family tree. And that family tree we're very proud of. I'm lucky to have lived long enough to have this happen. But all of it starts with being lucky enough to marry a beautiful, talented, wonderful woman who gave me 4 wonderful, wonderful, grand, beautiful children. And your mother is just one of them. And you're going to have 3 beautiful, talented, loving aunts in Kathy, Margaret Ann, and Maureen. That's the most I could give you.
Mm-hmm.
And the family, you'll also be welcomed by all of many, many cousins. We just loved having a new arrival.
Yeah. And
you will be the first grandson, which is going to be one thing you can never replace. Now, your grandfather, my family, I was not lucky enough to have a mom and dad after I was 13 years old. My mom died when I was 7.5. And my father died when I was 13. But I was fortunate enough to have a family, or at least a forethought in my family, of having a guardian who happened to be a nun in the convent. And my father left her in charge with the small pittance that he left to see that I was well educated, and therefore I went to boarding schools in the second grade on. In the academy at Victoriastown with nuns who today would probably be in jail.
This was in Philadelphia, right?
No, in Victoriastown, Pennsylvania,
okay.
100 miles from Philadelphia.
Okay.
but it was the only place my father could find for three of us. My sister, who was 7 years older, could go to school, and my brother, who was younger than I, would be able to go to school. But there was no other places where he could be sure we were all together, because he was a firefighter. In those days, firefighters in Philadelphia worked some 80 hours a week, and they weren't home all the time. He wanted to make sure we were all together. And in those days, they didn't have babysitters and caretakers and so on, and he couldn't have afforded it with the salary of a firefighter in Philadelphia.
Right.
And therefore, my aunt in the convent, she also had another sister in the convent, and a cousin. They arranged, and I'm sure they made a deal with the nuns to give us a little break on the tuition for all of us. So that was part of it. And then from there, my aunt heard about a school. My father was very sick when I was in the 8th grade. And so she heard about this nice boarding school with brothers, and the Zavarian brothers in Baltimore, Mount St. Joseph. And so I got down there. And fortunately, I lived there for 4 years. So I was lucky in that respect. But the important thing is that in all of that, it seemed like I got a good education. And of course, when the war came, as most teenagers were at that time, we were excited.
Right.
We knew war was bad, but you know, you don't want to miss something.
Right.
In those days. And of course, the advent of that war, to us, we had friends in the school that were drafted. They had a draft in those days, 18-year-olds, they had to register. So we had some kids that we went to school with and knew, were actually getting drafted out of school. So it was very close to us. And
you were, what, 14 or 15 when Pearl Harbor happened?
I was a sophomore in high school.
During Pearl Harbor happened?
Yeah.
Okay.
And some in our school, one of the kids in our school was named Larry French. And we all thought the war was a joke, actually. I told you this before. They said, you know, the Japanese, I mean, this war will be over shortly. We never thought about the European side. It was going on altogether. Although we knew about it, but it was not an awareness that this suddenly would become so big. And right after the thing started, we heard Larry French's father was on the Arizona, which was sunk. So all of a sudden he came home to us. Then we had many others that whose parents had been in the service. One in particular that I went to school with, was in a boarding school with me, named Mike Fenton. Mike's father, in fact, Mike's father was a full colonel. He was a career officer in the Marine Corps, and his brother had graduated before us. He then went into the service right away. His Mike's brother, but. So we were aware of the war, but you know, it didn't mean so. But it was brought home to us very forcefully, and we followed the news, of course, very carefully. But that was all part of just growing up. When we got out of, when we graduated, and of course, the thing was that my aunt, of course, being my guardian, legal guardian, when she's a nun, she's not going to let you quit school under any circumstance.
Right.
And she said, besides, you're not old enough. And so she wouldn't sign for me. And
I saw her name on some of your papers.
Sister Agnes Xavier. Yeah. She's well, she was tough, but she taught school for many years. She was a clerical, a secretary back in the 1914, 15, and she actually joined the convent. But then when the family was having troubles, she came out of the convent for a couple of years and then went back in. So, but she was one of, I can't remember all the people in the Nolan side of my family. She was my father's oldest sister, Aunt Katie. His next oldest sister was Helen. Her daughter, 96 years old, is still living in Florida. My Aunt Helen's daughter, Mary McLean, she married a guy right off the boat from Ireland. And then there was another, John Nolan, he was a doctor. He died in 1917, very young. He was a doctor, graduated from Jefferson Medical College, and he was a doctor. And then that was, not say Helen, John, yeah, that was all of them. And but anyway, the family thing was very. But I never saw a grandfather in my lifetime. I never saw a grandmother in my lifetime. And the closest I had was my mother's aunt, who was also from Ireland. She lived, Annie Beebe, she lived to be 89 or 90, but I never saw, my mother died, as I said, when I was 7.5 years old. But on her side of the family, we had Uncle Terry Clements, we had Uncle John, and her name was Clements. Uncle John Clements, Uncle Terry Clements, and Thomas Clements.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a John Thomas on both sides.
Mm-hmm. What was your mother's name?
My mother's maiden name was Clements.
And what was her first name?
And her name was Catherine.
Catherine.
So anyway, that's
there you go.
Catherine. It was my mother's name, and she was considered to be. In fact, I even took the pictures down there. To be her day, she was the most beautiful thing in the family. They said, and because she had a sister named Helen McGuire, married McGuire, and but Aunt Katie was. My mother was Katie. She was the prize of the family. They said. In fact, my one cousin is still living. He's 88 years old now. He always said my Aunt Kate was my favorite, and it crushed him when she died. Of course, he's 4 years older almost than I am. But anyway, I was lucky to have that family. But going away to school, boarding school, and all, you lost track of all those. You only saw them on holidays. My father would come up to Sherrystown when we were in elementary school. He'd take us home for Christmas, and he'd take us home for a couple of weeks in the summer. The rest of the time, we stayed at school. Mm-hmm. And we'd stayed at some relative's house. He rented the house that I was born in, 4500 McGee Street. That's the house I was born in. I was born in the front room of the house. And my next door neighbor, her name was Gertrude Heim. She was married to a guy named Mike Heim, a very German family. And Gert delivered me. Mm-hmm. And so we always kidded about the front room. And when I got married, finally in 1948, I was living in one room in Philadelphia, and my house had been rented. My father's had rented the house when my mother died in 1934, and then my aunt in turn left the house to be rented after my father died. And when I got married, they canceled the rent, canceled the tenants, and I bought out my brother and sister. That time, I think the house was valued at $7,500, which was a big deal.
Right.
So I got a mortgage and paid my brother and sister $2,500 a piece. So anyway, that was the house I was born in, and it was pretty nice to me.
Right. And that was in 48?
That was in 48, yeah. And but shortly thereafter, in 1949, the political fortunes of Philadelphia were such that for 80 years the Republicans had run it. And one of my neighbors when I was growing up, 2 doors away, 3 doors away, and that was named Vogt. And Mr. Vogt was a Democrat, and my father was as a firefighter had to be a registered Republican, always a Republican. And Mr. Vogt used to come around all the time, and when I moved back into the house, because he came over and saw my registration was Democratic, he was thrilled to death to have me. But shortly after the 1948 elections, when Harry Truman carried the city of Philadelphia, and we also dumped out the Republican congressman that had replaced Bill Green. We dumped him. We dumped him. His name was George Sorbacher. He was a Marine Corps Marine. He was in uniform and he ran for Congress in 1946 election, congressional elections, and of course he won. And in 1948, when Harry Truman ran, I was part of the Young Democrats and very active. And shortly after the election, I got a notice from the city that all my sidewalks had to be replaced and my curbs had to be replaced. They were all unsafe.
Right.
And of course, I was a corner house. There was no houses near me. There was a cemetery behind me. And there was no other houses for a mile almost up the hill. But my sidewalk was a hazard.
Right. And if you go back now, I'm sure it's all built up.
Yeah. That's so I get back now. In fact, it's amazing to see it. But there's still no houses very close. There's houses fairly near. The cemetery is still there. But the amazing thing about that's the way political things is. When we had all these things to do with the house, and also we came down here to visit when my first two, Kathy and Margaret Ann were born. I used to come down for Christmas, for the holidays, to visit Peggy's mother.
Who lives here in Baltimore?
Yeah, she was in Baltimore.
Okay.
Yeah, I should have said that when I talk about Peggy. Fortunately, that was one of the things that, I guess that was one of the benefits of going to Mount St. Joe, was because that's how I met Peggy. She lived around the corner from Mount St. Joe. and I used to meet her, and when I was here, and when I came home then, I used to commute when I was in college. I worked in drugstores and on the nights, so many nights a week, and then Saturday when I'd close the soda fountain and the drugstore up, I would hop a train and get to Baltimore. Get into Baltimore about 11 o'clock at night. Peggy would meet me at the train station and we would go to church down here. And so I just couldn't afford to commute anymore. I mean, I got a GI Bill, I was only getting $85 a month, and of course working part-time, I was not able to afford it. So I finally decided that I had to get married. I was forced into getting married.
Sure.
And of course Peggy used to always say that you're the one who commuted, don't tell you I chased you. Anyway, that was part of the whole thing.
And this is in 47, 48?
1948. And well, see, when I came out of the service, I signed up right away for college. I was supposed to go, my aunt in the convent had already registered me at Villanova University because one of her friends and my Aunt Peg, that's the youngest sister, that was my father's youngest sister, Peg. She was a spinster, but she was very big on the Redemptorist Order in Philadelphia, and Redemptorists had I think it was Redemptorists had Villanova University, now the University College, and they had registered me already, but it was, when I was living in Philadelphia, I was living in a room and I was taking my meals at a friend's house where my sister lived, boarded. There was too many streetcars and buses to get to Villanova, so I stopped at LaSalle, and I thought, well, I might as well go in and apply here. And they sent me an acceptance in like one day, so it was like one streetcar, 15 minutes from where I was rooming, so I stayed at LaSalle. But I took they had the accelerated course, you go 6 days a week, no spring breaks or anything, so I got out easier that way. I guess I started in October of 46, and I got out in June of 49, so it was compressed. But I always had a job. I mean, I worked all the time. I was at the drugstore job, and then when I got married, I had to get a better job, so I got a job in a Cuneo Press, Eastern Press in Philadelphia. That was about 20-minute streetcar from McGee Street. And
so Peggy moved up to
Peggy, oh yeah, I finally got her to move up to Philadelphia. When I got my house back, I got her to move up to Philadelphia. And then I was working at Cuneo Press at night. And actually I was working at Cuneo Press from 4 to 12 at Cuneo Press. That was when I was in college. And then the last year of college, in 49, had a hard time with the foreman over there. He was upset with me taking off to graduation, a couple of days of graduation. So anyway, I left Cuneo Press after I graduated and got a job with at that time Cuneo Press used to print all of Life magazines, Time magazines, Stover's Shooting Bible. They printed comic books. It was the largest printing press. And Life and Time, of course, were the biggest things pressed. And they had a special building for those things. And I used to be lucky enough that the beginning of the week to get over and be a broom pusher in the building with Time magazine because of the fact they paid an extra 4 cents an hour, which is amazing in this day and age. And to be the janitor over there rather than be a catcher over here off a printing machine, you have to print them and count them and put them in a pile. But anyway, that was interesting work. And then I got a job at the SKF Ball Bearings, and that's a Swedish company in ball and roller bearings in Philadelphia. They paid much better. That was the Steelworkers Union. I was a time study clerk there, and I got a job there, but it was 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and that was when I first got out of college. I was teaching, so it was tough to get out of there and get home and shower and shave.
When did you have time to sleep?
I didn't have a car the first year I was teaching. So I had to walk 2 blocks to get a streetcar.
This was teaching in elementary schools or high schools?
Elementary school. I taught the elementary school. It was an elementary school. It was built in 1880, and it was an old building. And I was the only male teacher in the place, and I was started there substituting for what they called an opportunity teacher. In those days, we'd call it special education today. An opportunity teacher was a very talented teacher named Peg Burkle. I always remember her. She was very talented. She had music, she played piano and everything. And she had 21 kids in one room, and they were all ages from like 13, some of them were 18 years old. And then they had 21 cots in the next room, and they had sliding doors. These buildings had sliding doors from sea waters in it. And every so often I had to go tell them, I'll take a rest and calm down. And I filled in as a substitute. And the irony was, my degree was in secondary education for history and English.
Right.
I did my practice teaching in the junior high and senior high. And when I got out, there was no appointments right away. And of course, being married, and Kathy was born 3 months after I graduated. Kathy was born in August of '49. I needed to get a job, and I substituted one day, first day of school, in a school called Kennedy Crossing, and the principal there, I walked in, I said, I've never been in elementary school, public elementary school, in my entire life. I don't even. He said, well, teacher left lesson plans for the first day of school. He said, just go in and see if you can follow those plans. And he said, I noticed you have a ruptured duck pin on your coat. Were you in the service? I said, yes, I was in the Navy. He said, well, just go in and tell them Navy stories, tell them sea stories for a while, keep them in order. So I did that, and of course the teacher was out for a few days, and I was there about the third day. He said, how do you keep these kids in order? He said, man, when your classes come down the hall, they're so orderly. He said, you know, that they drill them in marching. I said, no. I said, I just expect them to do what I tell them. And of course, being a parochial schoolboy, I mean, I used to help them sometimes to stand in line. I used to pull a little hair behind the ear here, or give a little punch in the side. And they just learned the first day. He was very impressed.
This was an all-boys school?
No, it was a regular public school in Philadelphia. And so the end of a week there, I thought, well, I have to wait for somebody to call me up, and this woman called me, and her name was Helen McGorgy. McGorgy was, she called me up and she said, Mr. Crossan up there told me that you were a very effective element substitute. Would you come down to my school? The school was a streetcar ride into Frankfurt at Paul and Unity Street in Philadelphia. About a block away was the elevated line, so you could hear that. The building, as I said, was built in the 1880s. It was a monstrous building. Of course, those days buildings didn't have elevators.
Right.
And I went into the school, and this woman, I used to call her Shark's Teeth. I didn't call her that to her name. But when we were in the service, the ship in South Pacific sometime, we would sit around and make little bracelets and stuff for little shark, these sand sharks and all this. And anyway, the guys would come up with these little shells, and we put them into bracelets and things like that. This woman had 3 strings of beads around her neck. They weren't shark's teeth, but we used to call them. Anyway, she was very big, and she was probably at that time 5'10". She was pretty heavy, and you could hit the wooden floors. You could hear it boom, boom, boom. And she said, Mr. Crossan said you have good order. She said, this is a very difficult class. Miss Burkle's mother is dying down in Absecon, New Jersey, down by outside of Dam City, and she'll be out for a couple of weeks maybe, so we should come in and try it. So I tried it, and she used to come by every day and look in the classroom. The kids were sitting still, and they were quiet, and they were learning something, and at least I thought they were, and she apparently was impressed. So she said to me right there about the third week there, she said, you taking graduate course? I said, I'm over at Temple taking grad courses. And she said, well, if you would put a couple of elementary courses in your curriculum, because I was just taking history. And I was going to work on a master's, so I never did get it, but never earned master. But anyway, I said, oh yeah, I said, she said, take that. She said, I'll get Mr. What the hell was his name? They had area superintendents then. I think it was Walton. But anyway, she said, I'll have him come in and talk to you. She said, maybe we can get you appointed a regular teacher so you can have a regular check every day, because I can use you in this school.
Right.
And I said, all right, fine. So I signed up for some teachers and courses, and she did get me appointed, so I got a regular job. So I at least got $240 a month. Every month. Right. Of course, the time they took out pension and all this stuff, I got $157. But anyway, but it's thank God I had that night job working at SKF, because they paid in cash every week.
Right.
So I could make some expense. And I finally got a car that Christmas. But
the Christmas of 1949.
Yeah, 1949, yeah.
What kind of car was it?
Well, the car I bought, I never got home, was a Buick, and I bought it 2 days before Christmas, and on the way home it blew an engine. And I called the guy up, and by that time it was Christmas Eve, and I couldn't get him. So the day after Christmas, I called him and said, well, I'll make good on it. Well, I paid $320 for it. I mean, that was...
You paid $320 for your first car.
It was a 1938 Buick, a two-door Buick with those big tires on the side, like the fender. And he said, I'll make it good. So I went down there. The only thing I couldn't get my money back. And there's no guarantee, apparently. You know, you buy a car, then even the same. So he said, I'll give you a new car, another car. So he gave me a 1940 Chrysler. And it was the Chrysler was a four-door car, and it had everything automatic on it, except there was a few things wrong with that too, but at least it lasted.
Right.
And we were able to put the kids in the back seat. And but after I had it for less than a month, in fact, a week after we got, no, not a week, the first year, I think I kept it almost a year. We were coming down to Baltimore. That was an interesting car. My brother-in-law, Joe Frett, was a very big guy, my sister's husband. And every time I'd take him and my sister out in the car, because they had no car, it seemed like it wouldn't start. And Joe Frett would get out and push it. So we always said it had 4 gears, first, second, third, and Joe Frett. And he'd have to push it to get started. And I always remember parking on a hill.
Right.
Finally, the guy kept saying, it's a choke, it's this, it's this. It had automatic stuff, everything was automatic.
Right.
Even the windshield wipers were automatic in those days. It was, and it had some other overdrive or something. We're driving down here to Baltimore. It was a very exciting trip. And they didn't have 95 built then. They didn't have any of that. So I used to come down Route 1 all the way through Philadelphia and come down Route 1 across the dam, up the Conowingo Dam. And we're coming down. And the way we would pack, we would put suitcases in the back seat. Oh no, that was the following year. And that was that year, that's right. And we would put the suitcases in the back seat, then we'd take the crib and we'd take it apart and lay it across the back seat. And then we'd put the kids in their in their sleeping bags. They had sleeping bags. We put the kids in a sleeping bag and we laid them on the back seat. And that was, you know, you didn't have car seats then. Nobody would have that.
It's funny because I just installed our car seat yesterday.
Did you? Well,
and it's like got straps. And
I
hooks
know. Well, see, we were just lucky, and the kids just laid back there. And by the time we get underway, and of course, it used to take almost 4 hours to drive from Philadelphia. You're coming through Philadelphia, coming down Route 1, and we're coming down Route 1, and right before we got to the, or right after we crossed the dam up to Conowingo, we heard it bang, 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 and it was, God, I stopped the car and got out, and here the running board, and they had running boards in, and the running board, the bolts in the running, holding the running board on, it came off in the front, and that running board was hanging by 2 bolts in the back, and it went back under the car. It was flapping against the, so, you know, what do you do at 11 o'clock at night?
Right.
And we're scared to death, and these kids come up, 3 kids come up in the car. You know, what's got a problem there? And Peggy said, give me your money, give me your money. She put all the money in, put everything, everything in the sleeping bags of the kids in the back seat. And the kids said, we have a friend that has a garage right down the street, you know, we can get this thing off for you.
Right.
So they pulled the running board off and put it in the back, in the bumpers between my truck. And sure enough, there was a garage down the thing, and it had lights outside of it, and the guy was, it was open, and the guys were playing cards in there. So these kids couldn't have a friend. Right. We pulled in, and sure enough, they wired the thing to the thing, and they said the guy didn't have any bolts to do it. But this is like 11 o'clock at night. Right. So by the time we got down here to Dunkirk Road, and that was, mother was kind of worried about us. But
that was where Peggy's mother lived?
Yeah, that was Peggy's mother lived in Dunkirk Road. But anyway, that's just a sidelight. But
see, it's funny, you said the first car cost $320. The car we bought that's outside, the one we just bought last week, 25 grand.
Is that right? Yeah.
We're talking about a difference of 50 years or whatever.
Well, not only that, I mean, the funny part about this, when I finally got the Chrysler always was giving me problems. So one day, it seemed like there was always something going wrong with it. So I said, well, I really have to get another car. So in 1950, I kept that car for over a year. My brother-in-law got tired of pushing it, and I got tired of repaying for it. So I finally, in 1951, I got a 1946, 1946. No, I take that back. They weren't making them. They'd start making the cars in 40. It was a 1940, what the heck was that? It was a Chevy Club Coupe. It was a Club Coupe that had, it didn't have 4 doors, but it did have a little big back. The back was pretty good.
Right.
And got that car, and I got rid of the Chrysler. I think I got less than $100 for the Chrysler trade-in, but I had to get rid of it.
Right.
But the Chevy lasted a long time. When I moved down here, the Chevy, I still had it.
So this was just when Kathy was.
Yeah, when Kathy was born in '49 and then '51, and Morgan Ann was born. So I had the 2 kids before I moved. So what happened is we began to look around when the city gave us the thing about the sidewalks in 1949, and then we came down here in 1950 for the Christmas time. We had coal furnace then, and we had the coal furnace was there, and then we had a bucket a day, they called it, next to that. That's what you heated hot water. We had radiators all in the house, and we came down here, and then you had a coal bin in your cellar. You had this coal, and we came down here for Christmas. So when I got home, all my radiators are frozen, and the fire had gone out, and the radiators all exploded. So I had to get a new heating system in.
Right.
And we got tired of, we said, you know, Peggy said, let's get the hell out of here. So we started looking for houses, and we looked up in Burlington, Bristol, Philadelphia, above Philadelphia. A nice house up there I could get a GI loan on, but it was so far for me to drive down to teach. And then we looked across the Tacony-Palmyra Bridge in New Jersey, and every house we looked at there was either a train station or a highway on there, because in those days, trains used to run right through towns.
Right.
And we actually were going to give a guy a check for a house over right across the river in Jersey, and we're talking to the guy, and we hear a train. The guy said, "Where's?" He said, "Well, the train's on the other side of that block."
Right.
Well, Kathy by that time had walked away with her dolls in the doll cage and been brought home twice by cops. And of course, the house a block behind us was a one-way street off of the Tacony-Palmyra Bridge,
right.
And the street behind that was a one-way street onto the bridge.
Right.
And here she takes
so busy traffic and all that.
Traffic and all this sort of thing. So
and she's only 2 or 3 at this point.
Yeah. The second time that the cops brought her home, cops said, don't be mad at her, we gave her an ice cream cone. Well, I said, well, the last thing she needs is an ice cream cone. But anyway, we were worried because she always took off. We would put a rope around her, put a harness on her, and tie a rope around that and tie it to the front pole to the front of the house. And actually, we had hedge around the house. We had a house hedge this high all the way around the front lawn. Now our house was a double house. There was a little porch rail here and a little pole here, and then the house next door, Mrs. Himes' house. They were what they called duplexes in those days. It was 2 houses together.
Right.
Space.
Sure.
And she'd get down there on that lawn, and somehow I'd get that goddamn harness off, and she'd get through the hedge. And the next thing you know, how'd she get the coach there? I never know the Dodge coach. So anyway, we said we can't have anything near traffic.
Right.
So Peggy said, well, we're looking up here. We have to. All those friends you have in Mount St. Joe from Baltimore, why don't we go down and look down in Baltimore?
Right.
So I checked into teaching down here. It was the same lousy salary. So it didn't make much difference that way. So we started looking at houses down here.
Right.
And George Morrow, he lived 5 doors up the street. Rosalie Morrow, who's still living, and her husband George, Rosalie had gone to, Peggy had gone with high school with Rose and her sisters. All the sisters went to Seton High, they were all friends. So we would come down here to Baltimore, we would always visit them and go to parties with them.
Sure.
So we had a lot of friends from Rosalie Morrow and George, and they became our closest friends. And when they were buying a house over off of Walford Boulevard, we went with them one day. We said, we're going to buy one. We put a deposit down, $50. And
so the deposit for the house is only $50?
The house, yeah, at that time. That's all they asked for at the time. But anyway, we said $50. So George and Rose put one down, and we put one down next door to them. Well, then about 2 weeks later, Mother was living on Dunkirk Road. She called us up and she said, gee, they're building some nice houses in the woods. This was all woods around here. She said, they're really nice little houses, and she said, they're really close by, and when you come down, you'll have to look at them. So Peggy and I drove down here, and we took Rosalie and George with us, and they went with us. They looked at these houses here, and the sample house was around the corner, 1202 Walker Avenue, and the 1200 Walker Avenue and 1202, both were sample houses, and we looked at them. We both liked them, so I went over to try to get my deposit back, and they said it wasn't. But George Morrow was in the National Guard. He was an officer in the National Guard. And he said, well, my guard training, I have to do this, that, and the other thing. And they gave him an exemption. They gave him his $50 back. So he bought a house
Just a few doors down.
Yeah, 1264. So George and Rose moved in with us at the same time we did.
And this was in 51.
1951, yeah, at the end of 52, it was 1952. And 52, yeah, that was when it was, 52. And then, well, I moved down here in June because I got the teaching. They said they would hire me and they would give me an assignment in Baltimore, so I came down twice to get interviewed. And so we had the movers move us out of our house. We sold my house in Philadelphia in June, moved out, and the house wasn't finished yet. I said, well, it'll be ready in June. Well, it's going to be July. Well, it never was ready until November. We moved in 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Meantime, our furniture's in storage, and we're living at Mother's second-floor apartment on Dunkirk Road with 2 kids.
Right.
And Mother and her.
And with your mother-in-law.
My mother-in-law, yeah. Well, I called her mother because I was the only one to remember.
Right.
But anyway, and I was teaching at Brems Lane Elementary School, which was not a far piece to go. And then finally in November, George and Rose moved in. I think they moved in a couple of days before we did. And we moved in. Unfortunately, it was a rainy day and everything was just, but when you're trying to get stuff out, and then some of the stuff, the furniture wasn't packed for long storage, and refrigerator was moldy as hell and everything else. But anyway, and that was our arrival in Baltimore. But
and that's this house.
This house, yeah. And well, this was a good deal because this house. That's one of those things you think about ahead of time when you first get married. This house was $9,990, and the amazing thing about it is I got a 4.5% loan from 4.25% GI loan. So it was good. And the guy said, for an extra $1,500, we'll make a club basement for you. And I said, oh no, that's too much money. We couldn't. It was an extra $2 or $3 in a mortgage.
Right.
And the end of the group, well, that was $11,000. In other words, I had to pay $1,200 more for it. And we didn't want the end of the group because Peggy said we just had a custom-made couch built, and she said, where am I going to get a wall to put a couch on?
Right.
So she said we have to take an inside thing. And then we had to get a right-handed kitchen because my sister had bought a row house in Philadelphia. And everybody said, what the hell's a right-handed kitchen? Well, if your refrigerator door, nowadays you can reverse the doors.
Sure.
In those days, so
side,
have a refrigerator. So my sister got a house, her kitchen, the damn door opened. You had to walk around the other way. So we made sure that we counted all the houses down to get a right-handed kitchen. That was a big deal. But anyway, that's how we came into here. But that was the funny thing about it. So the girls all grew up here, and until Margaret Ann told me, 2 years ago when I broke my neck, that they used to fall on the steps without a railing on the other side. I never knew that because we never had a railing on the other side of my steps there.
Oh, you mean against the wall?
Yeah. There never was a railing there. And then all of a sudden, when I broke my neck, they had this woman come in and tell where I needed railings here, railings there, put railings outside, railings on my porch. So I said, nobody ever falls down. Margaret Ann said, what do you mean we never fell down? We fell down the steps a lot of times without the railing. So anyway, it became interesting. But the most interesting thing for most people was moving in here. Aside from the fact that Peggy stayed home with the children until Maureen was in 7th grade. And then Maureen became the poor little last child. Her mother was not home when she came home from school. She was a key child, a latch key child.
Right.
Trouble. But Peggy stayed home and never worked outside the house except with the girls. Each one of the girls can tell you, and Mary Beth can tell you especially, about Peggy having them at the dining room table doing her homework. I mean, boy, they were. And when they were going to elementary school, St. Matthew's down there, Kathy and Margaret Ann went there. I don't know about when they were going to school was so crowded, they had 2 shifts. I mean, they had some kids go in the morning until 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, and then the others would go in the afternoon. And they all did very well in school, but Peggy used to sit at that dining room table, and she kept them. And of course, the one thing, and Mary Beth, you probably heard the story, but it's a funny one, but Mary Beth is very, very sensitive in some ways. And they were talking. Kathy was the biggest talker. And in fact, we used to say that Margaret Ann was so late learning to talk because Kathy never let her. Anyway, but Mary Beth, one of there's a picture of it too. I don't have it. Would never have it. Mary Beth used to be talking so much that Peggy put scotch tape on her mouth. She was sitting at that table.
To Mary Beth.
Your Mary Beth, your mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And I think that Margaret Ann or Margaret Kathy said that she cried. It was so sad. Anyway, because we never would do anything but the kids cried. But see, when I wasn't always home, Peggy was always here because when I was teaching, I always had at least 1 or 2 other jobs. For instance, I drove a cab for years and years and years. Sometimes I drove 2 nights a week, and I drove on weekends. And I drove a county cab when I first moved here. That was over on Register Avenue on York Road. And there was only 6 of us. All of us were teachers or some jobs like that. And
what years did you drive?
I drove a cab from 1952 to 1957, and county cab. And then he sold it to guys that 3 brothers owned what they called. It was called Ansley Cab because the neighborhood was called Ansley, and it was York Road and Register right behind the drugstore at that time. And so I would drive there on the weekends, and I'd bring the cab home on Saturday night because I used to go out and pick up people out in Murray Hill and places like that, take them to church on Sunday. So I drove the cab, and then when they closed that cab, I got a job with Yellow Cab downtown. And you can get down there now, of course it's no longer there. It's Greenmount Avenue and Preston Street. It's right there.
Yeah, I know where that is.
It's abandoned, the whole section's abandoned now, I think they used to be. But anyway, Greenmount and Preston, and I drove a cab down there for, I guess how many years, I can't remember how many years that was. But then I got a job selling encyclopedias in the summertime.
Right, I've heard about this, that you were an encyclopedia salesman.
Yeah, well, when I was teaching then, I was teaching at 26 in St. Paul, Margaret Brent Elementary School. And the teacher, one of the parents there in the school, she was a manager for World Book. Her kids were in school. And she came and told the principal, we hire all these teachers in summertime. And she said, well, get Jack Nolan. I was the only male in the school. So she got me, and first summer we did very well. And I used to get $40 a commission for every set. I used to get more money if I sold, as they added products. They added dictionary, and they added childcraft things, and they added all these other things. So I was lucky enough to do very well. And at the end of the summer, they would always have a trip to New York, award winners and so on, high performers, and I won a lot of things. I won a television set, I won a playpen when Maureen was born. I won a playpen. The manager said, you get 5 sets this week, or whatever it was. I made all the qualifications. And then at the end of the summer, they would have a bus thing, a weekend in New York for all the high performers, and we used to go to New York the end of summer. We'd go to New York for a weekend. They'd take us two Broadway shows, dinner and things like this. And in '64, I did that till '64. We went to the World's Fair this day. That's when I broke my ankle and my foot in New York. But anyway, it was an exciting time, but I always had that job, and I drive a cab besides. And so and that way I wasn't home all the time. And, so Peggy, it was her job to see the kids, and she did a phenomenal job.
Now, what did she do before you got married?
Before I got married, well, I could hardly, before I got married, when I was at Mount St. Joe, I worked at Mount St. Joe. The first year I was at Mount St. Joe, my aunt got me a thing that the brothers that owned Mount St. Joe had a camp in Leonardtown, Maryland, Camp Calvert, fantastic camp. And so I spent the summer down there, and I was we had a brother in every cabin, and they were like our mentors, and then every cabin had somebody to help the brother, and I was that, and then I waited on tables in the camp, and that was my paying my way. Right. And that was my most exciting summer in my lifetime up to that point, because they had swimming down there, they had canoeing, we had long-term swims, they had canoeing, they had boxing, they had wrestling, all the things, the sports and so on and so forth. I had all these little medals I won, boxing and canoeing and the 5-mile swim and 3-mile swim and all. So anyway, it was a fantastic summer, horseback riding, it was just everything there. And now that's a school down there, it's called Riken High School down there in Leonardtown, Maryland. Right on Brenton Bay, it's a beautiful place. I mean, right across the water from Brenton Bay was a Camp Maria, it was a girls' camp. It used to be swim across. Anyway, the whole idea, that was, and for a kid, a city boy that's been in McSherrystown, Pennsylvania with no water around.
Right.
To suddenly find myself in paradise with a brother in the cabin and all these sports and all these guys. And of course, a lot of kids from Baltimore had a lot of people.
Right.
I mean, they paid big money to go there. So that was the second year I was there, and they said they would keep me on as a help the groundskeeper. So I lived at Mount St. Joe, and they paid me a little salary.
And when was this? It was
in 1941. When I was, let's see, 1941 was the first summer there.
So this is while you were in high school.
High school, yeah. And in 1942, then I was working on the grounds. The following year, in fact, the winter time came. A friend of mine at Mount St. Joe, his mother was assistant personnel manager for the Union Stockyards. Armour and Company owned Union Stockyards, and so anyway, the meat packers. So Union Stockyards was a streetcar ride from Mount St. Joe, and then about a half-a-mile walk or something down to the stockyards. So this guy, Lou Heim, Mrs. Heim, got me a job at the stockyards.
Did you say these are the people that were your neighbors?
Yeah, they were, no, Mrs. Heim, no, this is a different Heim.
Different Heim, okay.
This is in Baltimore, Mrs. Heim in Philadelphia. This guy, Lou Heim, was a Mount St. Joe student.
Oh, okay.
And his mother, so when one of the brothers said, hey, I said, I'd like to get another job. So they said, because I didn't want to just hang around the school because it was a very minimal pay. I wanted to start making some money because in Mount St. Joe, the private, you had a private room or a semi-private room, you had to pay $100 extra. And my aunt said, well, Jackie, you ought to go out and earn that $100 extra. So I said, okay. So anyway, I'm looking for a job, and Lou Heim's mother said, they're taking people on down at the stockyards if you want to come down and work the summer there. Now, it's a hard job. And so I went down, I worked in the curing cellar, which is an interesting whole thing about when they cure hams and how they vents and vets, and it was damp all the time. You had to wear boots, and but anyway, it was a very exciting job. The curing cellar, and then of course we had to work in the slaughterhouse. You had to get through the slaughterhouse to go to lunch even, but and watch them kill the different animals and how they did it and all. It was kind of interesting. And then when I finished that summer, they said they needed somebody on weekends to wash the trucks, because they had these big white trucks with Armour and Company written on. So on a Saturday morning in my senior year, and part of at the end of the junior year and senior year, I used to get on a streetcar and get down there and wash trucks, and that's how I earned money. And so working for the stockyards. And,
so this is while the war is going on, while you're
while
in
the
school.
war's going on, yeah. And so then, as soon as I got out, as I mentioned to you before, as soon as I graduated from high school, then Aunt Katie said, well, I can't keep, and you'd be 18 at the end of the summer and you'd get drafted. So I said I wanted to go in the Navy, because where my sister was living in Philadelphia and where I used to take my meals before I got married, there was a family called Rudolph. They were very German. And my sister had gone to nursing school with Betty Rudolph, and she had lived there, and then she took her meals there. So when I came home, I took my meals there, and I got a room around the corner in Philadelphia, 3rd Street. But anyway, that's how I knew them. So Betty's husband had gone in the Navy. He was a nurse, a male nurse, and that time was very rare too. My sister graduated from nursing school in 1939, and Frank Connors and a guy named Jimmy McGuire were the only 2 men in the class. All these women nurses. They both went in the Navy, and strangely enough, and I'm sure I told you this story because I reminded nurses these days, that in the Navy, a male nurse would be a non-commissioned officer, but a female nurse became an officer. So in other words, the female nurses in the class that joined, they became 2nd lieutenants.
Right.
The male nurse, Frank Connors, went in, he was a chief pharmacist mate. So Frank then had said, if you're going to join the service, get the hell in the Navy, because number one, you'll get out of the country faster, because the Army sends us to the goddamn many schools. And of course for him it was easy because he was a nurse. And he was, in fact, he was in the invasion of Africa, and he was wounded.
So Operation Torch or whatever it was.
Yeah, whatever it was. And but he was in the. So anyway, when I came home, I had the address of Connors, Betty, Mrs. Rudolph, May Rudolph's house, and I joined the Navy. And then they said, "Okay, we'll call you." So I had a month before they called me. Actually, almost 2 months. I didn't go into boot camp until August. I think it was when August. I think whatever it was discharged, and. So that was the thing, and that summer, I think I was selling jewelry for some store, Lakin's Jewelries in Philadelphia, and I was also working. Where the hell else did I work? I worked somewhere that summer, and then I got. Oh, I know. I got a job at a elastic thread company. If you ever heard of it, elastic. They make the thread that goes in your socks. Elastic.
Okay, sure.
That's the worst job in the world. I did that for a couple of weeks. I used to go home. I was covered with latex all the time, but fumes in there were just incredible for the chemicals. You take a string and you put it on this little thing, and there's whole rollers, and they can string this through all this chemical stuff, all the way down to like 50 or 60 feet down there. All these chemicals, and by the time the string comes out the other end, it's elasticized.
Right.
But you had to dump all this latex in the tubs up this end, and so it pulls it all out there. By the time you get done, I mean, it splash all over you. It was a messy job. That was the other job I had, but I didn't keep that long enough. I just couldn't take that one. But anyway, that was the story of Philadelphia to Baltimore, and from Mount St. Joe to Philadelphia, back to Philadelphia to the Navy. But one of the interesting things in the Navy was, one of my friends in the Navy, and I'm sure I told you this story, is that when we got into boot camp, we got off the train and got into Sampson, New York, boot camp. Different trains were coming in. I came in from Reading Terminal in Philadelphia, and we got in there early in the morning at Sampson, New York, and we got in line, and these other guys were coming in from other places, and we all joined it. We got down to the camp, and they started calling roll, and they called roll. Nolan, yeah, and another guy yelled, yeah, John. Both of us raised our hand. We were assigned to barracks in different companies. They had A, B, C, D, E, F companies, and each company, each division, different camps. Each of the camps had 3 or 4 companies. The company was, I forget, 100 and some guys. But anyway, they had barracks for different guys. But each unit was a separate unit. It was like all around this Geneva, Lake Geneva, New York. And so we both ended up in the same D unit, which was they said it was the worst unit in the camp, but we didn't know that at the time. And when they called roll, both of us had the same name, John Nolan. His name, middle initial was E, mine was T. So we ended up assigned, he was the upper bank, lower bunk, upper bank, book, and bunk. But anyway, John E and I became close friends, and we got mail. I'm sure I told you this. Mail, who's it from? Mary Nolan. His sister was named Mary, my sister was named Mary. So and a few years ago, not a few years ago, many years ago, we kept in touch when we first got out of the service. We ended up in the same sea draft. We got back from boot camp.